The track number 4 即係以前一串嚟嘅，喺個河度刮啲泥上嚟，淘金。而家停咗喺度俾我哋當個博物館俾我哋睇。喺個河度掘啲泥應該係。ไปพักแคนาดาoperate 即係帶我哋去 tour。
Permafrost. If you imagine the surface over here and bedrock down there, you'll find the thickest concentration of gold, the pastry, just above the bedrock, and other decreasing percentage of gold as you get near the surface. Let's say you're panning along on the surface time, it gives you a not exact indication of how much gold may be farther below the surface. So how are you going to get at it? You're going to set a fire in the wintertime on the frozen ground and slowly thaw your way through the permafrost, say 15, 20, it might be as much as 80, 200 feet down to bedrock, hoping to find that golden underground river. How fun does that sound? Are you feeling lucky? So it's not very likely you'll hit that pay streak on the first go. You might have to sink a great many shafts, try and perhaps connect underneath, make galleries underneath to try and find that pay streak by cross-cutting your claim. The point of this, folks, is that it reeks of effort. It's not very certain. And, well, you can probably imagine as you're down there at the bottom of the shaft, I'm going to get dramatic here, folks, picking away at the light of a guttering candle, wondering there's got to be a better way. And of course there is. You just can't afford it. So what made these things change is there was a great shift in the way that gold mining was done around here, and it happened after the railway was completed from the ocean at Skagway to Whitehorse, downstream from the Worth Rapids. And once that railway was put in, it was completed in 1900, you could finally import heavier equipment at a much, much reduced cost, get it over the mountains by rail, and float it down to Dawson on a paddle wheeler like the SS Kino, which I encourage you to visit. Segue. So, once that was in place, you find people were looking to mechanize their gold claims as fast as possible. Steam shovels, excavators, powered by steam, and finally, large machines like this one. There's one other wrinkle in this, which we'll talk about real briefly. I imagine you're not that curious about the red tape, or perhaps you are. So, gold claim, folks, is 500 feet long. That's an individual gold claim. And you can see the dredge is a couple hundred feet long itself. It's not very practical, and you're not going to get enough money out of your single claim to pay for a whole dredge. So some early visionaries, including the most interesting person you've never heard of, Joe Boyle. Has anybody actually heard of Joe Boyle? Yes, amazing, cool. What did you learn about Joe Boyle? In brief. All right, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. All right, I got it. So let's see. Okay, I really would love to spend the rest of this tour telling you about our Canadian Indiana Jones, but I'll try and focus. So he was originally from Woodstock anyways. He comes up in 1897, and he sizes up the ground around here, and he says, all these hand miners working like ants are going to be replaced sooner or later by large machines. And so, the next summer of 1898, against that flood of stampeders, the 40,000 people that made their way here to Dawson, he's passing people on the way out, going to Ottawa to secure not one claim, but a large concession, which is many square kilometers of otherwise low-paying gravels. This was along the Klondike Valley. There's plenty of gold in it, just not enough at the same spot to make it worthwhile for you to dig by hand. But a machine like this, which could in an hour or so move as much dirt as a lot of us could do in a week, is very much more efficient. And so that's the point. So far so good?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll talk a little bit about how the dredge is put together, and then we'll go on board and explore. So that's the plan. So let's see now. This particular dredge was the biggest one. Joe started a company called the Canadian Klondike Mining Company, and he built dredges 1 and 2. checks out, in 1905. And as these proved successful, it also required investment in power plants and water rerouting in order to make all this work. But this was all in place by 1913 when they built dredge number 4 over here. And what it is, folks, is a big washing machine for rocks that floats. The barge section over here, you can see down below the darker wood. This over here is called the digging ladder. It's in essence like a chainsaw, but with buckets for teeth, right? Each of the buckets, you can see some examples over there, weigh 2.5 tons, and they're filled with, well, just about a ton of gravel themselves, each one, except for the ones on the bottom. Those are empty. Okay, we'll dispense with the comedy then. So all the materials being dug up like so and dumped inside this hopper, basically a funnel, and all that material is being directed into the trommel, which I was delighted to learn is German for drum. It's a big 50-foot long hollow drum with holes on the outside. The holes range in size from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. And anything bigger than my 2 thumbs, folks, goes out the back on the conveyor belt for waste rocks you can see just behind the sign. And it drops the rocks 140 feet behind the dredge in a pile of tailings. You guys must have noticed on the Klondike Highway all those rocks out there. That's what causes that. And now, at the risk of my dignity, I will demonstrate the action of the dredge. It's okay, I got friends in a rich inner life. I'm going to be okay. All right, so first of all, the dredge is floating once again. This is the spud, that's the anchor. You can see those two hanging out over here. Just one thing, folks, sorry about that. What's missing from here is the stern assembly, the stern gantry that raises and lowers all that. It's currently at our maintenance compound in Bear Creek for restoration. So, first thing you want to do is you drop your anchor, and the dredge is tied to shore by cables, 2 at the bow and 2 at the stern. And by pulling on these, you can turn the whole thing from side to side. Here we go. Digging arm, stacker, all right? So you're going to swing 150 feet or so in an arc, churning up the ground all the while, dropping it in the back, lower the bucket line at every pass, back and forth like so, until you've reached the limit of its reach, which is about 57 feet below the water line. What happens then? Well, you're out of reach, so you pull up the spud, pull on those cables, step the dredge forward 10 feet, and do it all again. And that's how you get that kind of fan-shaped rock patterns. Well, this... Sometimes we have a little extra time out here, and with 2 of my colleagues, we elaborated a whole dredge dance, but it takes 2 more people. So, one of them's the trommel doing this. All right, that's what's left of my dignity. Anyway, so, anchor, let's see. Right. Dredge doesn't move very fast, folks. In a 250-day operating season, it'll spend a grand total of a half hour in forward motion, or move about a half a mile per year. This particular dredge then was built just by the Ogilvy Bridge, the one you might have passed on your way here coming from town, right? And it dug its way along the Klondike Valley from 1913 until 1939 when it reached the mouth of Hunker Creek. And there it hit a really rich patch of gold. For a couple of weeks, this is great. They're hauling out over 800 ounces of gold a day. That's 50 pounds of gold every day. Do you know what breaks my heart about that? At the time, it was worth $35 an ounce. What a crying shame. There it is. So after they'd worked out that patch of ground, the company decided to relocate dredge number 4. So they took it apart and rebuilt it at the mouth of Bonanza Creek. Now, which one of you has the heaviest foot and the fastest driver in this bunch? No one's volunteering, eh? All right. Yeah. I drove out. Okay, here we go. Yes. May I ask, good sir, how long did it take you to drive just from the intersection of Bonanza Creek Road? Great. All right. So I drove a government vehicle. As far as you're concerned, it took a casual half hour. All right. So it took dredge number 4 18 years to make that same trip from the mouth of Bonanza Creek to this spot right over here. 18 years, man. That's not very fast. What it did get is plenty of gold on the way. So a word here.
This is where it stopped?
Not exactly. It stopped a little closer to the hillside.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, on this claim anyway.
Okay.
So what happened then, actually, so they finished work in November of 1959, an otherwise normal end of season. The workmen lay down their tools and says, see you next season. But nature had different ideas. A few kilometers up the way is the Upper Bonanza Dam. Was the Upper Bonanza Dam that collapsed in the spring of 1960 and sent all this water charging down the valley, tore at the cables anchoring the dredge to shore, and sank it in 20 feet of muck and silt, just about to the line of the lower line of windows you see over there. And when you get on board, I'll invite you to notice the line of rust that climbs just about my height 7 feet. I couldn't help it, sorry. So you'll see a line of rust on the bulkhead, and that's as far as it was. The Canadian Army and the Park Service sucked out all the muck and silt out of the hold, and it actually floated on its own after 30 years in the dirt. And there it is today, high and dry for us to visit. Questions so far?
Yeah. Why didn't it keep going after that?
Why didn't it keep going? Because it sank.
No, did they build another one to keep going down?
So there's another wrinkle to this, right? So let's see, how do I keep this brief? After the 1920s, the various dredging companies were all consolidated into one called the Yukon Consolidated Gold Company. So in essence, Dawson was a gold mining company town like so many others you find in the north. And so these guys had a pretty assiduous plan of testing the ground and figuring out where their deposits were. And they figured there wasn't enough gold waiting ahead of the dredge to make it worthwhile to pay to refloat it. The last dredge of all shut down in November 1966. Pretty much all the dredgeable areas had been reached at that point. And well, the problem really is that the price of gold was fixed and the cost of everything else continued to rise. So the writing was on the wall for quite a few years before they shut it down. I'm glad you asked. Sir?
How did, since it's at the float,
Uh-huh.
I don't see any lakes around here or puddles, or how did they get the big pond, and then did they have to refill it as they go along?
Periodically, but mostly it's moving the pond itself, digging it from the front and shoving the rocks out the backs of the pond. It's moving the pond with itself. There's some photographs I think we'll pass on the way. You can see the dredge wallowing. It is hard to picture this whole thing floating. It displaces 3,000 tons, right? But yeah, it needs about 15 feet of water to float in, and that's about good enough. So part of the reason for this dam is to control those water levels in the creek. You might admit more water or let some out if you want to get a little closer to the ground, so you dig a bit deeper. But yeah, it's pretty wild that it worked at all, though. Right on. Who wants to go on board? I know. Okay, so we're going to stay together. We're going to go around the gangplank right this way. Follow me, please. All right, folks, it's not all obvious from the outside just everything that's going on in here, but I assure you everything has a purpose, and I know most of it. Just for fun, by the by, and I'm not going to give you the answer right away, and if you read it on the sign, do be cool. Play along, all right? So I want you to guess, and I'll tell you the answer in the control room, how many workers it took for one single shift on board the dredge. It did operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all that, but for one single 8-hour shift, try and imagine how many workers it took to operate. I'll tell you the answer later. I think this is So where we find ourselves now is the main deck, which is in part an ad hoc repair shop. There is a maintenance camp at a place called Bear Creek, just 10 kilometers from Dawson City, where all the winter maintenance and the upkeep and all that stuff was done. But as the company, as a broad operation, a vast operation, and these dredges are the only parts that make money, whenever they shut down, those are real problems. They wanted to fix it as fast as they could on board. So one of the employees on board, the oil man, was also capable of fixing stuff. So you'll see some basic tools that thawed out of the frost all those years ago. There's a grinder over here, another one yonder. There's a lathe here somewhere, drill press against that post, right? So the idea is that they're able to do little repairs on board. Please. How many total dredges were there? In total, so this is a little hard to calculate, and believe me, I've tried. There's just a number of different companies in the early days. They amalgamated, they renumbered the dredge, but in short, about 3 dozen. 3 dozen, and in the time of the dredge number 4's main operation, there's only about 1 dozen operating from Bonanza, Hunker Creek, on Sulphur, on Dominion, and on the Indian River. Yeah, so quite a few. Each one of these has to be serviced, they have to be kept in operation, and they're all taking their gold out. That's not a bad business, you know. Besides, folks are still mining for gold in the Klondike over 125 years later. The dredges did not get them all. It's also worth $4,000 an ounce, which is a great improvement. All right, so if I can turn your attention overhead here, do you remember when we were talking outside about that big trommel, the big drum with the holes in it? So that's spinning right above my head right here, above this V-shaped trough. So that's called the distributor box. So the first thing that happens then is all that material passes through the trommel, and anything, once again, that's smaller than my 2 thumbs will fall through the holes in the screen first into the distributor box. We're going to get a closer look at this up on the sluice tables. But what's happening here is there's jets of water splashing in each of these kind of compartments that you can see, and that lifts all that gold-laden dirt onto the sluice runs, which will be covered with riffles and things of that nature, right? We'll take a look at that real quick. I just wanted you to appreciate it from this dimension. You get about 20% of your gold harvest comes out of that distributor trough through a spigot at the very end when they go wash it out. The whole back half of the vessel is taken up with the gold collecting tables, and that makes sense because that's very much the point of the thing. So far, so good? All right, so we're gonna head over to the pumps real quick and then make our way up the stairs to the small deck. Down below is pretty. If you'd like to see, and I don't have a chance to take you down there, the virtual tour, which you can find for free online, takes you down there. You'll hear from the purpose. Just out this door, folks, you can see the pond where the dredge was actually sunk. And have you noticed along the bulkhead, along the walls here, that kind of rust line that stops just over our heads? Yeah. So, what are the two things you need to mine for gold? After dirt with gold in it. Water. Water, excellent. It's like we planned this thing. Awesome. Yes, water and of course power to operate it. So in the first answer, the water came from the pond that the dredge is in, and all that water goes right back into it. So it's constantly recycled. The pumps behind, or in front of me, and just next to you guys, one of them brings water to the trommel deck and the other to the sluice deck. Together, every minute, they lift on board 12,500 US gallons of water, or for us Canadians, nearly 50,000 liters of water per minute. So when we're thinking about the dredge, obviously you imagine it's pretty noisy, but it's also damp and wet. So you'd be freezing in here, just shivering in your raincoat, wondering why you didn't make better life choices. 12,000 gallons. Now I know that might be a little hard to put in perspective, so I did a little math the other day in order to visualize the problem. Perhaps some of you have seen an Olympic-sized swimming pool. You know what? Maybe that wasn't the best example. I can't remember the last time I was next to an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But they contain about 1 billion liters of water. The upshot is, folks, if you used your garden hose to try and fill that, it would take you 3 weeks. If you use these pumps over here, it'd take you 45 minutes. Right? So that's what we're talking about. An incredible volume of water all being recycled back into the pond. When we go up the stairs, you'll be able to tell the intake for the water is like a screened-in sort of mesh, and that prevents all the schmutz and debris from being sucked on board. Schmutz is a technical term. Right. So the other thing we need is electricity. Oh, Jesus, I gave it away. What was the dredge powered by? Great. So where the power plants were and how they established them is another interesting story. I am going to cut to the chase, don't worry. So in 1906, this dredging company built the North Klondike power plant, which is a hydroelectric generating station. And in 1911, one in the Tombstone Mountains, the North Klondike and the North Fork power plant, the little 12-mile in the Tombstone Mountains. So together, these ran power cables into the gold fields and into Dawson as well, 40,000 volts AC on a 2-inch thick cable. Amazing. So you hear stories from people who lived in Dawson at the time when all the dredges were operating at once that the power would fluctuate in town sometimes as they drew more or less power from the grid. And maybe it just burns out your vacuum motor or something like that. Were vacuums invented in 1913? No, they were not. Anyway, so the upshot, folks, is that all this is far away and it takes a lot of money. This is what's out of the reach of the individual miners, and this is part of we see that transition from these armies of people working by hand with primitive tools to large things like this. I, as an individual miner, I can't afford to wait 3 years to build a power plant, to build a water diversion project, and hope to haul a profit out of it. So it takes these kinds of more organized corporations, I suppose, if you will. We might have lost a little something of the romance of it at that time, though. What do you think? Yeah, all right. Who's ready to hike our mini Shilgood, shall we?
Sure.
All right, let's take our time.
All thing, Mr. Still. Oh, yeah.
Most of our other says, I like, don't touch the artifacts. We're here, please. Get your hands in here.
Yeah, it's all good.
And that stern assembly I pointed out at the beginning, right, that's missing, these cables hold it up. So it's a little loose right now, and the only reason I can move it is because there's not 40 tons of wood hanging off the back. All right, we'll let everybody catch up here. think we got room for everyone here, folks. Long way up the stairs, though, I get it. We also have some benches, which great opportunity to show how courteous you are. You can sit on this roller too if you want. This. That's more comfortable though. Alright, are you the last one? Great. Hey, you can have me. Okay, we got everybody? No. Okay, I know, there's lots to look at. It's pretty wild. Okay, so let's see now. First things before I forget. Our pipe over here is the same one we met downstairs coming out of that pump, and it runs the whole length of the trommel, which you can see behind me. It's 50 feet long, and there's holes all along the side. We'll take a look at that in a quick second. This large steel casing is the bottom of the hopper, so that's what accepts all the rocks. Check this out. The bucket line moves at about 22 buckets per minute, so that means every 3 seconds, another ton of rocks is clattering up in here and getting washed around in the trommel. Can you just imagine, man? Then you could hear the shriek and the howl of the dredge up to 15 kilometers away. And here we are standing on board. What a great plan. Right up. So all that stuff is getting churned up and washed around, and I guarantee you, with the chief hazards of working on the dredge, hearing loss. Why didn't people wear cotton wads in their ears or the like? We do have quite a number of, oral histories, or people talk about what it was like working on the dredge. And they say that protection and those things like that just were not thought about. I have a really difficult time accepting that. It's like, it's loud, I'm going to stuff something in my ears. I don't know if it was seen as unmanly or what, but the company was certainly not providing you with protection or much of a retirement fund for that matter. Right. Anyway. So, as I briefly mentioned outside, all the metal parts you see here came from Ohio. And yes, Ohio is quite far away. All these things had to appear in Dawson in various shipments. There's at least 7 separate shipments with some crates weighing up to 20 tons with all the metal parts on board. The wood was pre-cut and milled in a, a sawmill in New Westminster, BC. The biggest parts are done with a spur. You probably noticed there aren't trees this big in the Yukon, eh? Yeah, it's kind of a problem. So, Ohio, wow. All this stuff had to come by rail across the United States to the west coast, up to the ocean, up through the ocean rather, to Skagway, over the mountains by rail, down the river on a paddle boat, and finally to the construction site from Dawson's waterfront. There used to be a railway that operated in the goldfields. You can still see some of the trains, by the way, in the Dawson Museum shelter. So, all that's fine except for some of the bigger parts. I know you noticed when you got up the stairs this 14-foot diameter gear. Without belaboring the point, folks, there are tunnels on the White Pass and Yukon River trains, tunnels too small to fit these things. So what they do? Well, they brought them all the way to the mouth of the Yukon on the storm-tossed Bering Sea and pushed them upstream against that current for a solid month before getting them here on time. The remarkable part is that they managed to get all the construction bits more or less in a timely fashion in the summer and early fall 1912 and the rest in the spring of 1913. And this thing started working in late May of 1913. Do you want to hear a fun tale about how something went wrong? Typically. So let's see. One last shipment is on its way down from Whitehorse in the fall of 1912. And what happens here in October is the river freezes, maybe a little later on, but they decide to roll the dice and says, we can totally make it. It's only 36 hours downstream on a paddle boat from Whitehorse to Dawson, so I don't think they were crazy to roll the dice. However, as they're going along, the temperatures drops, ice starts forming around the ship, and it is frozen fast a couple hundred kilometers upstream, just about at the mouth of the Stewart River. So what do? They just wait. They wait a couple of months until the ice was firm. They plowed out a track all the way there and hauled the material into town by sleds, just hauling it in just like that. And apparently, according to the newspapers of the day, this provided a, quote, highway for deportment for the citizens of Dawson. How cool is that? Okay, now because I can't resist, I'm going to share you my favorite part about this whole thing. This is pretty dorky, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, so the Marion Steam Shovel Company still exists. They transformed into the Marion Power Shovel Company. Checks out. And so you know those crawler transporters that used to bring the rockets to the launch pad at Cape Canaveral? Totally built by the Marion Power Shovel Company. So I'd like to think in a spiritual sense dredge parts went to the moon. That's definitely a stretch. I did it. All right. Anyway, I just thought it was neat. They were bought out in the late 90s by their century-long competitor from a nearby Ohio town, but there's still like heavy manufacturing happening in that region. And if you ask the company archives, they'll show you all the plans of the old dredge. Those, we don't need that. We have those right here at the creek. Question. Oh, sorry, just thanks. Okay, great, save me.
Question. So in early days, people would come here in the hopes of finding gold and getting rich. So workers on the dredge, were they paid well, and were they hoping to get rich, or?
Let's see. Well, the short answer is no and no. So they were paid a steady wage. It wasn't glamorous, but check this out, right? So in the heyday of dredging was in the 1930s when the price of gold advanced from $20 an ounce to $35. So suddenly, like, the local industry is worth a lot more. So while you wouldn't expect to get rich, you certainly have a steady wage, which is a great, improvement during the Depression. So not like the wealth beyond the wildest dreams of avarice, but just a steady paycheck is what you can expect, and year after year, because the company did operate for good 40 years, right? But yeah, the workers weren't paid great, guys. You'd be in the $8-10 a day range here on board. The best paid guy was the winchman who actually drove the thing. He was paid $4,000 a year, and he also had a nice place to stay. And he's the only one that had a year-round job, though. So yeah, steady job is perhaps better than rolling the dice in a gold field. Besides, as we talked, mining for gold sucks. At least back in those days. Anybody else have questions?
Where did the workers live?
That's a great question. So you can imagine they didn't live on board. It's noisy, it's shaky, and all that. So they would live in bunkhouses and camps. Camps would be set up just nearby wherever the dredgers were operating. And once they got too far away, they simply relocated the camp. But it is moving, as I said, half a mile per year. So every year, just got to walk a little bit farther to get to work. That's absolutely. Please.
How thick is this material in the hopper, and how long would it last?
It's about so thick. And on the parts that like receive the rocks, there's like extra metal plating, not unlike some we'll see on the aft end. So like this kind of thick metal plating lines.
And was that replaced yearly?
Yes, or as often as required. Yeah, this is one of the crucial like maintenance and wear and tear spots, right? And as I mentioned, one of the workers, the oiler, his job is to wander around, making sure everything stays more or less hunky dory and basically get ahead of
And I
like
see
that.
bolts there. Was it bolted or is it welded?
Bolted and welded in parts, but yeah, those ones are bolts. This is, it must have been something to put this together. Oh yeah, I forgot the most important part, Jesus. How much did it cost? All right, so, all of this, so Joe Boyle ordered 2 dredges that year, Dredge 3 and 4, they're of similar size, similar type, and altogether, both of them cost $450,000 to build, all right? So together, the company spent just shy of $1 million in 1913 getting their dredges in order. And guess what? They paid for it by the end of that season at $20 an ounce. Wow. The pile of gold. So yeah, the dredge was extremely efficient that way, and it's certainly the way of the future. What it isn't doing is leaving anything pleasant behind itself.
It's not, his condition is not going to affect
It's not falling apart either.
They're taking people to it, so yes.
Motion of it, raising the anchor, the speed of the motor is being controlled by these series of rheostats. If you'll let me dance behind you here. So the handle's missing, but as you turn the crank, this is the only one that's not seized up, right? It engages, the resistors more or less, and that adjusts the speed of the motors. You can take a closer look at that if you like. So all that, the speed of the throttle, the conveyor belt at the back, how fast the pumps are working, these all control the movements of the dredge, and if you want to know what's what, there's a handy sign. I don't have to remember. So all this is controlled from here. That means that leaves us our oil man, which we mentioned right at the beginning. He's wandering around checking out the gear. You've got your bow decker who hangs out right down there on the bow deck. And if you ever see pictures of these guys, they look pretty worn down, man. You're just sitting there with your shovel, trying to scrape the mud off the edge of the buckets as they come by to make sure everything falls loose in the hopper, which is just behind that window, right behind you. So, that's a job, and it looks unpleasant. And lastly, we've got your stern decker, and he hangs out where the conveyor belt meets the trommel, and he wants to make sure that all the rocks get off the dredge. Case in point. So you're also looking at the only heater on board. And I read a story, it's in the 40s, about